My name is Adrianne Voss. On paper, I'm a strategic consultant, but in the hushed, velvet-lined circles of the ultra-wealthy, I am known as a private wealth fixer. When a billionaire's heir makes a mistake that could cost a fortune, or a CEO's charitable foundation starts leaking dirty secrets, I am the one they call to make the problem evaporate. I don't hide bodies. I hide the truth by drowning it in a more convenient version of reality. I am the architect of the unfortunate misunderstanding. Before I open the file on the quality of mercy, listen closely. In my line of work, attention is the only currency that matters. If you aren't paying attention to the details, you're already the victim. That is why you are here, at Echoes of Trust and Betrayal. If you want to understand how the world truly operates behind closed doors, you'll want to ensure you are subscribed. Consider it your insurance policy against ignorance. Like this video if you're ready to see what money usually pays to keep hidden, and leave a comment with your own verdict once you've heard the evidence. Knowledge is the only asset that doesn't depreciate, but only if you have the stomach to use it. This is the story of the Sterling Reed Foundation. It involves Dr. Silas Reed, a visionary in geriatric medicine, and his shadow, Maya Koto. This isn't just a story about fraud, it's a story about the most expensive thing in the world, dignity. In the spring of 2024, I was retained by the board of Sterling Reed. To the uninitiated public, Sterling Reed was a benevolent, albeit exclusive, nonprofit organization that operated platinum-tier hospice care for the ultra-wealthy. But hospice is a terrifyingly inadequate word for the service they actually provided. They didn't just offer medical care, they offered a curated reality. I arrived at their flagship facility, the Gilded Gate, on a Tuesday afternoon. It was located on a private island off the coast of Maine, accessible only by a chartered ferry that looked more like a floating ballroom than a transport vessel. The facility itself was a masterpiece of architectural deception. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a Gilded Age manor house that had been dreaming of the future. Stone walls covered in ivy, hiding biometric scanners and oxygen enrichment intakes. We are talking about a place where the dying spend their final months surrounded by original Picassos and Rothkos, breathing air filtered through cedar and lavender, attended by nurses who were recruited from the best trauma centers in Zurich and Tokyo. These were staff members who spoke 4 languages, moved with the silence of ghosts, and anticipated pain before the patient even felt it. The buy-in alone for a suite at the Gilded Gate was $5 million, non-refundable, wire transfer only. Dr. Silas Reed was the face, the heart, and the curated soul of the foundation. He was a man of immense performative empathy, a secular saint who had written 3 bestsellers on the graceful exit, a philosophy claiming that death should be the crowning achievement of a life, a final masterpiece, rather than its collapse. I watched him work from the observation deck that first day. He was sitting at the bedside of a dying oil tycoon. Silas didn't check charts. He didn't check monitors. He simply held the man's liver-spotted hand in both of his own, leaning in with a gaze that simulated perfect, unconditional love. He would sit there for 6 hours if necessary, immobile, absorbing the fear of a man who had spent his life instilling fear in others. He didn't just provide medical care, he provided a moral anesthetic. He promised these men that the end would not be messy, that their legacy remained pristine. And then there was Maya Koto. If Silas was the dreamer, Maya was the engineer who kept the dream from collapsing under its own weight. She was his chief of staff, a title that barely scratched the surface of her utility. She had risen from the high-stress trenches of critical care nursing to run the entire operational wing of the foundation. She was the one who managed the discretion agreements, legal documents so ironclad they practically forbade the families from grieving in public without prior written approval. If Silas provided the soul of the foundation, Maya provided the silence. She moved through the corridors with a terrifying efficiency, a tablet always in hand, her eyes scanning for imperfections, a wilted flower, a flickering bulb, a nurse's uniform that wasn't perfectly pressed. But lately, that silence had developed a tremor. I saw it the moment we were introduced in the polished mahogany hallway of the East Wing. It was a minute flinch when Silas reached out to touch her shoulder, a gesture meant to be paternal, guiding. But Maya didn't lean into it. She froze. It was a microscopic fracture in the armor. It wasn't the look of a loyal soldier receiving orders from a beloved general. It was the look of someone standing on a cracking sheet of ice, hearing the deep groan of the water below, and waiting for the floor to give way. The call that brought me to the island didn't come from a doctor. It came from the CFO of the Sterling Reed board, a man named Arthur Vance, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The board didn't call me in because of a moral crisis. In my experience, boards view morality as a depreciating asset. They called me because of a spreadsheet error that had terrified them into action. A statistical impossibility had appeared in their quarterly projections, a crimson flag waving frantically in a sea of black ink. The issue was duration. The average length of stay at a Sterling Reed facility, specifically at the flagship, the Gilded Gate, was defying every known model of medical science. Patients with end-stage terminal diagnoses, men and women who had arrived with failing organs and mere weeks to live, were lingering. They were holding on for 3, sometimes 4 months longer than the national average for palliative care. In the world of private wealth, miracles are usually welcomed, but not when they come with a price tag like this. 3 extra months of platinum-tier care translates to upwards of $4 million in additional billing per patient. This wasn't just a variance, it was a hemorrhage. The foundation operated on a delicate business model, high turnover, high prestige, and the rapid release of assets to the next generation. But the guests weren't leaving. The occupancy rate was stuck at 100%, creating a backlog of dying billionaires waiting for a bed that wouldn't open up. The heirs, the sons and daughters waiting in the wings for their inheritance, were beginning to panic. I sat in Arthur Vance's office and listened to the recordings of their phone calls to administration. The voices were tight, strained, masking greed with feigned concern. They were grumbling in the hushed corners of country clubs and boardroom antechambers, wondering why nature wasn't taking its course. But they were trapped in a velvet cage of Silas's making. Dr. Reed had brilliantly leveraged their own public images against them. He had made the graceful exit a status symbol, a final act of filial piety. To pull a dying parent out of the Gilded Gate because of cost was to commit social suicide. It would paint them as heartless vultures in the eyes of the high society press. They were locked in by a combination of ironclad contracts and the crushing weight of social expectation. They weren't paying for tear anymore, they were paying for the appearance of being good children, and Silas was charging them a premium for the privilege. I told Vance clearly I wasn't looking for a miracle, I was looking for a mechanic. If death was being delayed, it was being engineered. I began my audit not by interviewing the staff, people lie to protect their jobs, numbers don't, but by examining the environmental logs. I descended into the facility's server room, a chilled bunker of humming machinery. I looked at the building itself as a biological entity. I spent 48 hours cross-referencing the maintenance data against the patient vitals. I scanned the data for the atmospheric thumbprint of a stall. I checked the oxygen enrichment levels, looking for hyperoxygenation that might artificially sustain organ function like a hidden life support system. I analyzed the barometric pressure variance. I even audited the artificial light cycles, which were designed to mimic a perpetual, soothing twilight to confuse the circadian rhythms. Everything was perfect, suspiciously perfect. The temperature never fluctuated by more than half a degree. The humidity was locked at a preservationist standard usually reserved for climate-controlled art vaults, not hospitals. It was a sterile ecosystem designed not just to comfort, but to suspend. It was a place where time itself was being asked to hold its breath, and I was the only one asking how. The breakthrough regarding the long goodbye didn't come from the cold data streams or the black and white financial ledgers I had been poring over. It came as a physical invasion of my own body. By my third day walking the halls of the Gilded Gate, I began to notice a sensation that defied medical explanation. It started as a subtle unease, a prickling at the back of the neck, but it quickly evolved. Every time I stood in a patient's suite for more than 10 minutes, surrounded by the heavy velvet drapes, the scent of fresh lilies, and the hushed reverence of the nursing staff, a dull, rhythmic throb would develop at the base of my skull. It wasn't a headache, it was a pressure, a phantom weight pressing against my cerebellum. It felt as if the air density in the room had suddenly tripled, pressing against my eardrums, trying to force my own heartbeat into a new rhythm. It was subtle, almost hypnotic, like the distant, felt but not heard hum of a massive turbine running deep underground. It made me feel nauseous, disoriented, and strangely compliant. I realized the sensation was synchronized. It matched the ticking. Dr. Reed insisted on a specific aesthetic for the suites: timeless elegance. Central to this design philosophy was a vintage mahogany grandfather clock placed prominently in every room, positioned directly across from the patient's bed so it was the last thing they saw before sleep. They were beautiful, towering monoliths of brass and dark wood, their pendulums swinging with a heavy, hypnotic cadence that seemed too loud for the quiet rooms. I didn't trust my gut. In my line of work, gut feelings are just bias in a cheap suit. I trusted my hardware. I returned to an unoccupied suite on the 4th floor, double-locking the heavy door behind me. I knelt on the floor and deployed a high-sensitivity seismic sensor, a specialized device usually reserved for detecting microtremors in tectonic plates or structural fatigue in suspension bridges. I pressed the sensor pad to the polished oak floorboards right at the base of the clock. The readout was impossible. The needle danced in a frantic, perfect rhythm that shouldn't have existed in a still room. The clocks weren't just keeping time, they were emitting a constant high-amplitude infrasonic pulse at exactly 7 hertz. In acoustic science and military research, 7 hertz is often referred to as a fear frequency. It sits right at the threshold of human perception and biological resonance. It matches the alpha rhythms of the human brain. In a room saturated with that specific vibration, the mind begins to falter. It loses the ability to distinguish between its own internal thoughts and external suggestion. It induces a state of waking dreaming, a neurological doorway left wide open for input. But this pulse was too clean to be accidental interference or mechanical noise from the gears. It wasn't just a byproduct, it was a carrier wave. It was a broadcast. Silas wasn't just soothing his patients with the rhythm of time, he was softening them. He was liquefying the barriers of their conscious minds, dissolving their critical thinking, and preparing them to be written upon. The clocks were the pen, the infrasound was the ink, and the dying patients were the paper. I had the sound. I knew about the 7 hertz pulse vibrating through the floorboards, the fear frequency that was softening the minds of the guests. But sound alone isn't enough to rewrite a human mind. The brain is a fortress, evolved over millions of years to filter out noise and protect the ego. To make a biological system truly responsive to that kind of subtle vibration, to turn bone, nerve, and gray matter into a high-fidelity receiver, you need a chemical conductor. You need to fundamentally alter the medium. I turned my attention from the physics of the clocks to the chemistry of the clinic. I descended into the sub-basement archives, a windowless, climate-controlled bunker that hummed with the sound of cooling fans and smelled of ozone and stale dust. It was the nervous system of the building, the place where all the secrets were stored on backup drives. I swiped my keycard, the green light blinking in the dark, and locked myself in. I spent the next 48 hours there, surrounded by stacks of servers and filing cabinets, living off vending machine coffee and adrenaline. My task was forensic accounting in its purest form, but instead of tracking embezzled funds, I was tracking missing molecules. I began by cross-referencing the purchase orders against the facility's waste disposal logs. The first anomaly that jumped out was the heat. I pulled the digital diagnostic logs from the facility's industrial incinerator. According to the data, the unit was running 20% hotter than the standard medical waste protocols required. On the graphs, it looked like a jagged mountain range of red spikes. That is a massive, expensive discrepancy. It suggested that thousands of dollars in extra fuel were being used to burn something that required extreme, hellish temperatures to destroy completely or to hide without a trace. I traced the burn schedule, overlaying it with the staff duty roster. The spikes in temperature coincided perfectly with Maya Koto's late-night shifts. Her ID badge swiped into the disposal bay at 3:14 a.m., 4:02 a.m., 2:45 a.m. I realized Maya wasn't just managing the staff, she was managing the inventory. She was burning pure, unadulterated precursors of Protocol 9, the Foundation's proprietary palliative sedative. But why burn expensive medicine in the middle of the night? I pulled the purchase-to-patient ratio and the weekly blood serum reports for the guests in the East Wing. The math was terrifying. The Foundation was ordering massive quantities of dimethyltryptamine derivatives and military-grade neural sensitizers, compounds usually found in experimental PTSD treatments or chemical interrogation, not hospices. They were ordering enough to sedate a small army. These weren't just painkillers. These were compounds designed to lower the synaptic threshold, stripping away the brain's natural noise filters, the myelin sheath protection, and making the mind hypersensitive to external stimuli. Yet when I looked at the patient's blood serum levels, they were only receiving a therapeutic minimum. So where was the rest of it going? It wasn't being sold. It wasn't being used. It was being refined. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was counting the atoms. Silas wasn't just medicating these men. He was processing them. He was concentrating these sensitizers into a highly potent, resonant fluid. I found the final proof in the plumbing schematics of the individual suites. The palliative infusions hanging by the bedsides weren't just delivering comfort, they were delivering liquid antennas. The combination was ingenious and horrific. The drugs stripped away the brain's natural defenses, leaving the nervous system raw, exposed, and conductive. Then, the 7 hertz pulse from the clocks stepped in, vibrating through that sensitized tissue without resistance. Silas was turning the patient's own nervous systems into biological receivers for the vibration coming through the floor. He wasn't just treating the dying, he was turning them into human tuning forks, resonant and waiting for a signal. I didn't wait for a polite opening. In my line of work, you don't ask for the truth. You corner it. I tracked Maya Cotto to a pharmaceutical bay, a sterile, white-tiled cathedral of glass and stainless steel located deep in the restricted wing of the facility. The room hummed with the aggressive silence of high-end refrigeration units, and the air smelled of antiseptic and ozone. She was alone, standing with her back to me, cataloging vials with the mechanical precision of a woman trying to keep her hands from shaking. She was holding a pipette, her knuckles white as she measured out a clear, viscous liquid. I didn't lead with a question. I led with the evidence. I walked up to the stainless steel prep table and threw the incinerator logs and the heat variance charts down between us. They landed with a sharp slap that echoed in the silence, the metal ringing like a bell. "I know what you're doing, Maya," I said, my voice low but filling the room. "I know about the burn cycles at 3 a.m. You're burning the contamination because the medical grade isn't pure enough for Silas's clocks. You're charging these heirs a fortune for the privilege of turning their parents into biological antennas. You're refining a chemical weapon in a hospice basement." I watched her face closely in the reflection of the glass cabinet, expecting the usual reactions of the guilty: denial, anger, the rapid blinking of someone inventing a lie. I got none of that. Maya didn't defend herself. She didn't even look at the charts. She just stopped moving. Her shoulders slumped, and she carefully placed the pipette down on the tray. When she finally turned to face me, her face was drained of color, not white with the fear of being caught, but gray with the exhaustion of someone who has been holding up a collapsing ceiling for far too long. Her eyes were rimmed with red, bloodshot from nights spent watching the incinerator burn. She looked at the sealed biolock door, her eyes darting like a trapped animal checking for a predator, then back at me. "You think this is about money," she whispered. Her voice was a jagged thing, brittle and sharp, scratching her throat. "You think I'm burning chemicals to hide embezzlement. You think I'm helping him steal. I think you're charging $5 million a head to poison them," I countered, leaning in, using my height to crowd her. "I think you're skimming the difference and hoping the soil samples don't give you away." Maya let out a short, hysterical laugh that sounded more like a sob. She stepped around the table, not away from me, but towards me, invading my space with a desperate intensity I hadn't expected. "Adrianne, look at me," she hissed, grabbing my arm with cold fingers. "Silas doesn't want their money. The money is just the ticket they buy to get in the chair. He doesn't care about their bank accounts. He's reversing the flow." She let go of me and grabbed one of the vials of the clear, viscous fluid, the refined Protocol 9, and held it up to the harsh fluorescent light. Inside, the liquid seemed to catch the light in a strange way, almost shimmering. "He's not taking anything out of their heads," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the confession. "He isn't a thief. He's an architect. He's not taking anything out. He's putting something in." She moved to a computer terminal secured behind a secondary biological firewall and began furiously typing in a sequence of commands. "You want to see the theft? I'll show you. But he's not stealing their wealth. He's stealing their history." Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard medical interface and accessing a hidden, encrypted partition in the server. The screen flickered, replacing the standard patient vitals with a complex oscillating waveform display. It wasn't a heartbeat monitor. It was an audio file, layered, looped, and time-stretched. "Silas isn't a collector," she said, her voice hollow, staring at the jagged lines on the screen. "He's an editor." She clicked play. Through the room's high-fidelity speakers came a soft, synthesized voice, Silas's voice, but distorted, rhythmic, matching the exact 7 hertz pulse of the clocks. It was whispering, over and over, a narrative of forgiveness. But it wasn't religious absolution. It was a specific, detailed fabrication. "You made the hard choices. You saved the company. The village was already sick before the spill. You were the hero. You bore the burden so they didn't have to. You were the hero." I stared at the screen, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The file was tagged for a patient in Suite 4, a mining magnate known for burying toxic waste scandals as efficiently as he buried his workers. The titans dying at the Gilded Gate aren't just rich. They are the men who spent decades making the world a harder, colder place. They are the architects of oil spills, the financiers of proxy wars, the men who signed the orders that destroyed ecosystems to boost a quarterly report. She turned to me, her eyes wide with a specific kind of horror, the horror of someone who has watched a soul be murdered. In the final, terrifying lucidity of death, the brain starts to panic, the ego dissolves, the defenses crumble. They start to feel the weight of it. They start to remember the faces of the people they crushed. They were planning to recant, Adrianne. They wanted to sign away their empires, to confess the locations of the toxic dumps, the offshore bribe accounts, the hidden ledgers. They were going to dismantle the very world their children were waiting to inherit. She pointed at the screen, her hand trembling. He stops that. He was a moral lobotomist. He used the infrasound to pry open the subconscious and the sensitized nerves to carry the signal, broadcasting a manufactured history directly into their bones. He was scrubbing their guilt. He spent hours whispering a false reality into them, overriding their memories of cruelty with memories of benevolence. He was convincing them that the blood on their hands was just wine, that every ruthless decision was an act of necessary mercy. "He's reversing the confession," she said. "He ensures they die in a state of unearned grace. He seals the cracks so the truth never leaks out. He's protecting the legacy of the 1% by killing the conscience of the 0.1%. I looked at the list of files, dozens of them. Every patient was being fed a lie to take to the grave. He was ensuring that the monsters died smiling, believing they were saints. And in doing so, he was ensuring that the systems they built, the corruption, the pollution, the greed, would remain intact, protected forever by the silence of the dead. He wasn't just saving their feelings, he was saving the status quo." The betrayal wasn't Silas's secret. In fact, if you looked closely at the org chart, Silas was just a highly paid service provider. The true horror wasn't the doctor, it was the employer. The board of Sterling Reed knew. They had always known. The statistical impossibility of the patient staying alive longer, the anomaly that had brought me to the island, wasn't a medical miracle or a mistake. It was a technical requirement. The moral override process was delicate, slow work. You can't erase 40 years of calculated sin in a weekend. The human conscience is resilient. It fights back against the lie. It takes 3 months of constant, low-frequency vibration and chemical softening to make a man truly believe his own fabricated history. The longer they lived, the deeper the signal went, and the more pure their legacy became. The heirs didn't want their parents to die quickly. They wanted them to die cleanly. A father who dies screaming confessions about illegal dumping sites or bribed senators is a liability. A father who dies smiling, convinced he was a philanthropist who saved the world, leaves behind a pristine will, a secure stock price, and a clear conscience for his children. The extra $4 million in fees wasn't for health care. It was a laundering fee for a dirty soul. The board didn't hire me to find a thief. They hired me to find out why the machine was jamming. They hired me to find out why Maya Koto was sabotaging the signal. Because that is exactly what she was doing. Maya was the saboteur. She wasn't stealing the chemicals for profit. She was diluting them. She was burning the pure precursors in the incinerator so that the overwrite would fail. She was swapping labels, underdosing the IVs, fighting a silent, desperate war against the frequency. She wanted those men to feel every ounce of the horror they had caused before they died. She wanted the guilt to break through the sedation. She wanted them to wake up in the middle of the night, terrified and lucid, and call their lawyers to confess. She wanted the truth to burn its way out of the gilded gate and scorch the earth. She had left the financial trail specifically for me. She had read my file. She knew my reputation as a fixer who found the truth. She knew she couldn't stop Silas alone. He was too powerful, too beloved, too insulated by the board. She needed an external force. She left the breadcrumbs in the incinerator logs and the purchase orders, hoping I would follow the money and stumble into the truth. She looked at me across the sterile lab, tears finally spilling over, her hands shaking as she held on to the edge of the table. "I wanted you to see it," she whispered. "I wanted you to stop him. I wanted someone to know that the peace they die with is fake. I thought you would care." She wanted me to be the whistleblower she was too afraid to be. She was fighting a war for the truth with nothing but a diluted needle and a conscience that wouldn't let her sleep. She thought that because I was a fixer, I would fix the moral rot at the heart of the foundation. She was wrong. She didn't understand what I was fixing. I did exactly what I was hired to do. I'm a fixer. I don't deal in justice, I deal in stability. I don't correct the world, I smooth out the edges so the people who own it can sleep at night without hearing the screaming of the people they crushed beneath their portfolios. I didn't join Maya's crusade. I ended it. I silenced her. I ensured her theft of the chemicals was documented so thoroughly that the narrative wrote itself. I sat in the server room for 3 hours, bathed in the blue light of the monitors, planting digital evidence. I backdated the inventory logs to show discrepancies going back 6 months. I transferred funds from a shell corporation into a dummy account I created under her name. I forged emails on her secure server, painting a picture of a woman driven not by morality, but by a gambling debt that didn't exist. I framed her sabotage not as a moral stand, but a petty embezzlement scheme gone wrong. I turned a martyr into a thief with a few keystrokes. The police report was airtight. Maya Koto, the only person with a living, breathing conscience in a building full of manufactured saints, will be in a federal cell for 30 years. She took the fall with a look of pure, hollow defeat. As the private security team led her away in handcuffs, big men in suits that cost more than my car, she didn't scream, she didn't fight, she didn't try to explain the chemistry or the frequency to men who were paid not to listen. She just looked at me and then at the closed oak door of Silas's office, knowing she had failed to wake the world up. As she passed me, she leaned in, her voice barely a breath. "You think you're outside the glass," she whispered, "but you're just another instrument in the band. Silas is still there. The foundation is still operating. He is still sitting by the bedsides, his voice vibrating through the mahogany, whispering lies into the ears of dying monsters. The tycoons are still dying with smiles on their faces, their sins erased by a frequency they can't even hear, their legacies polished to a blinding artificial shine. I left the island on the last ferry that night. I stood on the aft deck, wrapping my coat tight against the biting Atlantic wind, and watched the lights of the Gilded Gate recede into the mist. It looked beautiful from a distance, a beacon of warmth and care in the cold darkness. But I knew what was powering that light. I knew the generator was fueled by lies. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I pulled it out. The wire transfer from the board had cleared. It was a staggering sum, a string of zeros that could buy a lifetime of comfort. It was enough to buy my own silence 10 times over. For a split second, looking at those numbers, I felt the phantom throb at the base of my own skull, the 7 hertz pulse trying to find a way in. It was trying to soothe me, trying to tell me that I had done the right thing, that I was a professional, that I was a hero for saving the foundation from a rogue employee. I realized then that I wasn't just auditing the operation. I was the final step in the process. I was the fail-safe. I was the one who made the overwrite permanent by ensuring no one would ever question it. I am the silence that follows the scream. I am the reason the history books will tell the wrong story. As we end this account, I invite you to look at your own reflections in the black screen of your device. We all want a peaceful ending. We all want to believe we are the heroes of our own stories. We all want to believe that when the end comes, we will be judged fairly. But I want to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. If you found out your graceful legacy, your family's comfort, and your peace of mind were built on a lie that allowed a monster to escape judgment, would you want to wake up? Would you want the cold, hard, jagged truth? Or is the lie the only thing keeping you sane? Comment below. I want to see your answers written out. Don't just think it, type it. Would you burn it all down for a truth that destroys everything you built? Or would you take the hand of a man like Silas and let him whisper you to sleep? The lesson is this: the most profound betrayal is when someone saves your soul by killing your conscience. We trust doctors to keep us alive, and we trust saints to help us die. But sometimes the person holding your hand at the end is not there to comfort you. They are there to make sure you take your secrets to the grave. Like this video if you understand the cost of silence. Subscribe to Echoes of Trust and Betrayal if you're ready for the next audit. Because in a world of ghosts, the only thing more dangerous than a secret is the person hired to keep it.